Welcome. For those of you watching the replay, we'll be starting in just a second. Thanks again for tuning in. We're going to be starting up in just 1 minute. Today we're going to be talking about 3-2-1 backup. We've got a great program for you. I'm just going to give folks who are going to be watching the live stream a second to tune in, and we'll be starting here in just 1 second. Those of you that are going to be here with us today, there's a lot of great stuff that we're going to cover. We're going to talk about strategies to avoid losing your images. So we'll make sure that you are successfully backed up and don't have to worry about your photos going offline. So thanks for those of you who are tuning in. We are going to start in about 30 seconds. Just a couple of general guidelines. I will be keeping an eye on the comments on the Google Plus page. Plus, we do have a Q&A pod, so you are welcome to watch. I see Herbert, you said, how does it work? Well, you're here. So, and John says, what do we need? Hopefully you're here too, John. So we see you, and thanks for asking the questions. So that's going to work just fine. We are going to be digging in today with two guests about an important storage concept called 3-2-1 backup, which is an essential way of keeping your images, your photos, in fact, all of your files perfectly safe. So with that in mind, why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Rich Harrington. I am the publisher of photofocus.com, as well as a heavy consumer of digital files. I have two businesses, one that's photography-oriented, one that's video-oriented, and all told, I chew through storage. So keeping those assets safe is extremely important. Joining me today are two guests. First up, we have Robert Vanelli. V, can you give a quick introduction of yourself and tell folks a little bit about what you do for a living?
Hi, I'm Vanelli. I'm a photographer and an author, and I do a lot of sports photography. And in doing so, you overshoot at a sporting event, and in doing that, you need a lot of storage space. So I kind of cling to Drobo because it grows with me, and that's about it.
Great. And we are going to cover all sorts of different workflows today. We are joined by a representative from Drobo, who we're going to introduce here in just a second. But there was a question: are we going to cover the difference between Drobo and more expensive options like a Synology? Absolutely. I'll also be talking about how little tiny portable hard drives like this one. Did I have my phone number up there? I did. I just held my phone number up for the world. Yay! That you can actually use to take on the road with you. I'll hold up that side that has the Zelda sticker, which is a little bit better. There we go. How I use little portable drives like this in the field, as well as cloud backup. So we're going to talk about a wide range of options. But joining us also is the person that I have to admit that when I have storage questions, I turn to Mark, because Mark knows more about hard drives and storage than about 6 normal people put together. So Mark, why don't you tell folks a little bit about your background?
Hi, Rich. Hello, Vanelli, and greetings to the audience. My name's Mark Fuccio. I'm out here in Silicon Valley, which is where Drobo is headquartered. I've been in and around different parts of storage for probably the past 15 years. About half that time has been involved with Drobo in one way or another. I'm currently IVP of products here at the company, and as we'll get into things, all sorts of people have all sorts of digital data that basically become a part of our life that we want to keep forever. And unlike creating physical files of printed images or photographs or books, digital data is ephemeral and stored on a hard drive and presents a very different type of challenges. So I think Vanelli has really been taking a lead in sharing a strategy that he put together for himself. So I look forward to doing that and taking any questions that come in from the audience.
And thank you for that. You guys are definitely welcome to post questions either to the Google Plus page. We'll keep an eye on that there, so you can add any questions that you have there, or in the Q&A pod. So thank you guys for asking those questions. That's very helpful. As we get started here, I want to first tackle what is 3-2-1 backup. I'm going to assume that everybody who decided to give up a full hour of their time to learn about storage or watch this has either firsthand experienced losing a file, or at least the realization that losing your data could be catastrophic to your photography, your video career, your clients, things of that nature. It's really sad when you lose an image. And if you've ever had to do a paid recovery, if you were even able to recover, it's often a huge loss of time and potentially a huge expense. So let's first break down the concept of a 3-2-1 backup. And that first number 3 is 3 copies of data. Mark, why is it essential that we keep 3 distinct copies of our data? Because that sounds like a lot of work.
It sounds like a lot of work. We'll talk in the seminar of ways that we can mitigate it and make it an automatic system. But the idea of 3-2-1 is have at least a minimum of 3 copies of your data in two different storage devices and 1 off-site. So that's where the 3-2-1 come from. The idea is you want to protect yourself against a drive or a RAID array failure. If you have another separate unit on your same facility, you want to protect against the proverbial fire, flood, theft, break-in, and the way you do that is making sure you have something off-site in a different location.
And those 3 copies on at least two different media types and 1 off-site becomes pretty essential. And I think one thing that's important to realize there is you brought up, Mark, and Vanelli, I know you participate in this, having different options. So I'm going to give one example for a mobile workflow for me, and then Vanelli, I'd like to hear one of your workflows. So an example here is, I've got this unit here. This is my Drobo Mini, and when I go on big field jobs, I take this unit with me. And what I like about this unit is that it's got 4 drives on the inside. So I've got 4 hard drives working together as a unit. Now, what's nice is that one of these hard drives could fail. And if I wanted, I could set it up so 2 of these hard drives could fail, and I don't lose any data. But this is still one of my copies. So having something like this is nice. Now, this requires power, and what I like about it is it's got a built-in battery backup, so if the unit were to lose power in the middle of a copy, it wouldn't corrupt the files. But I'll still bring something like this, small, a USB thin drive with me in the field that I could easily take on an airplane and quickly check data. Something like this is not as protected against failure. If this drive goes down, I lose everything. But what's nice about the Mini is that part of it could break and I don't lose everything. But with every normal hard drive, single hard drive in an enclosure, or a lot of performance RAIDs that are out there where 2 drives are striped together, things like a G RAID, which is a performance RAID, not a protection RAID, what will happen there is if a drive goes down, you pretty much toast. So I think this is why we say, at least, 2 physical devices. We've got 2 physical copies. So Vanelli, you're frequently in the field, you're frequently at home. How do you implement this first part of the 3-2-1 backup in your workflow?
No, obviously being here, it's easier. You just get on with a shoot. I come home. I dump it to my computer. From there, it gets automatically backed up from my one Drobo 5D. It automatically goes to my 5N. So that's a simple solution when I'm here in town. Like you, when I'm on the road, that's where the 2 external copies I have to have. A third one I keep is I don't format my memory cards. I keep them. So after a shoot, I'll just flip them upside down and put them back in my case, so I know which ones I've used, which ones I haven't. I dump all the information to my computer. Now that's my one form of backup, and then I have an external drive, which would be my second form of backup. So a little bit different from what you have, the Drobo Mini. That's one thing I didn't have the luxury to do, like when I'm on an outdoor shoot. I don't have power. So the concept that I use is a small 4 terabyte drive and my laptop or my Surface Pro. And then once again, I make sure I don't format my memory cards, so if something happens along the way or traveling back home, I have some form of backup with that information.
Now, I'm going to go a step further. You mentioned flipping the cards over. I've got the cases here. I've had plenty of instances where a card comes loose. I'm going to go a step further and say get 2 cases, and in fact, color code 1. And so what I do is I put the cards that are usable in my right pocket. And the cards that are written to, I put in a fresh case in my left pocket. So the cards that are in my right pocket are the right ones to use, and the ones in my left pocket should be left alone. Now, that sounds silly, but you're on hour 17 of an outdoor shoot, or you're working with a crew. It doesn't matter if you flip that card upside down. If your assistant or a client runs over to get the card and they put it back in, or they drop the case and they fall out. So I'm going to say that not only are cards cheap, but card wallets are cheaper. So get yourself an extra card wallet so you don't experience that data loss. All right, well, you mentioned a couple things there.
Rich.
No problem.
I just found an extra one laying around, so I'll use that.
I do want to show a screen share thing here really quick. Let me switch over. Can you guys see Lightroom here for a second?
Yes.
Okay. So when I go to import something, a lot of folks don't realize that inside of the import dialog, you actually have the ability to make a second copy. So as you're importing that, you can decide where things are going to go, and you can decide to actually copy those. And when you invoke the copy, you could choose the option here labeled Make a Second Copy Too. This way, as you're importing to your first drive, you can also be simultaneously importing to a second drive, so you end up with 2 copies immediately upon import, which works well. Now, for me, I tend to just copy right to the hard drives and then import into Lightroom later, but that's up to you. The other option with that that's kind of important, I'll use a utility here like this one. This is a Mac utility called Carbon Copy Cloner that allows you to clone the data from one drive to another. But one of the challenges on that first import is making sure that you don't clone the data, but that you actually go through the effort of copying it twice. Mark, I've had this problem before with my own team. I'm sure you can describe it. What's the danger of cloning your first copy as opposed to making a whole second fresh copy at the very beginning when you start to ingest?
So the whole idea behind creating a clone is you want to make sure that the source that you're working from actually has valid data on it. So that's why a tool like Carbon Copy Cloner is essential, because it will validate that a good copy was made. It comes at the expense a little bit of time to make the copy, because it has to copy it and then verify it. But ultimately, if you're going to be in an environment like the one Vanelli uses, where everything's heavily automated, it generally will occur in the wee hours in the morning, and you want to make sure that everything is operating and validating correctly, and it's well worth it. I know, true story, the original founder of Drobo, the whole idea behind it was he was copying drives and went to go get wedding pictures and found that they weren't there. He had been making a copy of the drive that somehow got corrupted. So, that's sort of a human basis for how the company got going. Rich, I want to back up just a moment. So on Lightroom, can that be set up so that's an automatic option every time somebody does an import?
Yeah, it is a persistent option, meaning that if you set it once, it will continue until you turn it off. So that's a great way to sort of force yourself to have some redundancy. The only thing that annoys me is that Lightroom doesn't have that option for a validated copy. If you're doing video files, Adobe has another program called Prelude that's a lot like Lightroom, except it's for the importing of video assets, and it will do that verified copy where it makes sure that, oh, there's supposed to be 73 files here, and this is the exact file size of each file, and it validates that. Or you can even do the crazy where it goes bit to bit, make sure that it's a perfect copy. So there's different levels of validation.
Great, great. And I think the undercurrent here is make sure that the system is automated so that if you're in the loop, ultimately, if you're man in the loop, if that's going to be you, at some point you're going to make a mistake or make an error or fall out of a habit, and that's what opens you up to data loss.
Yeah. Mark, we had one small feedback. If you can move your mic a little closer to your mouth, that would help. Thank you. It's just fading a little bit. Thanks, Via, for passing that on to us. We had a couple good questions come in, and let's continue down this thread of traveling here. So one of the things that happens is we're traveling, and we want to make sure that we're in the field and we don't lose data. And this gets kind of scary. You know, I'm in the field, I copy my data, it's on my memory cards, I'm doing all that stuff, but then I'm a little bit nervous about what happens. How do we incorporate this back into our workflow? So it's pretty important that if you're out there working and doing stuff, that your stuff migrates successfully back. So there's a specific question here from Scotty about the Lightroom workflow, and I want to show one option here that's pretty important, and then V, I know you've got this workflow down. So let me just share Lightroom real quick. And one of those options here is we want to make sure that as we are making adjustments to images and we do changes, you can actually save the metadata back to the image. So you've got a couple of options here under your preferences of how all that data is being handled. And so if you're working with something like a DNG, well, then the adjustments automatically get stored in. But we do also have an option to make sure that the sidecar files are being written to the image. So as I'm sort of handling those files, it's kind of important, let's go ahead here, that any of the data that I'm doing actually gets saved with the images. And so you can find that. I'm going to remember where this is at. I'm, of course, forgetting. I brought it up. Where do I save my metadata back to the images? There you go. Save metadata to file. It's going to be under the metadata menu. I just knew I'd remember it. So that means that it'll actually put it right back in with the images. So even if you started to make adjustments, it'll put this as a sidecar file and make sure that that travels with it. So that's kind of an important option when you get back if you want the data to go back into your original Lightroom library. Now, V, you do this all the time. You're a road warrior. How do you handle, you know, being out in the world doing stuff and then merging it back in?
And it's funny that you're saying that because it just happened on our trip from New York, Boston, LA, back home. I took all these images and I put it in. I put all the images into Lightroom, and I started doing all my editing because we have a publisher who's very demanding. So I made sure I got everything done. When I got home, I didn't want to have to recreate those edits, so I exported my collection as a new catalog, and then brought it into my regular working copy of Lightroom on my desktop, and I imported it. And one of the tricks with importing it is making sure you create, or for my workflow, is I create inside Lightroom first the folder I want to import the new images into. And when I do that, everything gets transferred over into it. The metadata, my selects, my stars, and any of my edits I did on my Surface Pro automatically appears in my Windows or my desktop version.
Good. Very good. So I think we covered the mobile workflow. The big thing let's sort of just make sure we put a nail in is that multiple copies are essential. And so whether you're in the field or you're back at your desk, it's important that you end up with those multiple copies. So 3 separate copies. So I'm going to share my screen for a second, and then Mark, I'm going to have you jump in here just a little bit. Let me just share this and switch to my desktop real quick. I'm sorry for the tunnel vision there. Let's just minimize this. And can you guys see my desktop here on the screen?
Yes, we did.
Okay. So I'm going to just share my personal workflow. So I'm back here at my home office, and I've got a bunch of Drobos loaded up. So I have 3 of the 5Ds loaded with the accelerator cards in 2 of them, so they're super fast. And so what happens here is I've got my 5D volume A. And if you look at volume B, what's going to happen here as this spins up is that they are an exact match. I've got the same data on both of these drives. So every night, Carbon Copy Cloner will spin up, and in the middle of the night, it just simply says, oh, make sure that the files that are on this drive are going to be stored. So A1 copies to B1 every single night. And if there is something that doesn't exist on B1, it uses a feature called Safety Net, and it puts it in a folder, and it basically says, hey, this is ready to be deleted. That way, if I did something dumb, like threw away something on volume A that I didn't mean to, maybe I was in Lightroom and I hit the delete key thinking I was removing it from a collection, but I held the modifier key down and I actually deleted it off of the hard drive. Well, that means it's going to, on the next volume, go, wait a minute, were you sure about that? And so I like having that safety net. But every night, these are kept in sync. And so A1 mirrors to B1, which is pretty simple. Additionally, it's not just enough to have that happening at my desktop level, because both of these are plugged into my computer. Now, I've got them on separate power supplies, a well-protected, highly professional power supply, so that if I got a lightning surge, it wouldn't cause a problem, and hopefully that will protect the devices. But I also have something running. So I'm using CrashPlan, and CrashPlan allows me to protect my data and move it into the cloud. Now, this is not extremely fast, but CrashPlan is a utility, and I can say, take what's on this folder and automatically put it up to the cloud. So you see right now it's running a backup, and it's verifying the information, but it's basically pushing my entire photo library into the cloud. And there are other solutions out there. My photo library is pretty beefy, so when I first ran this, it took about 2.5 months to push everything to the cloud, but now it's not that bad. Additionally, if I just want to push it to another part of my house, I've got an 810N, and there's also a smaller unit called a 5N, which allows me to mirror the data to this network Drobo. Now, Mark, these network Drobos aren't quite as fast as connecting with something like Thunderbolt or USB 3, where you're using as your primary editing, but what's the major benefit of using a network Drobo like this, both internally and when you're on the go?
So there's, just to back up, so Drobo product family, there's a series like Rich showed, the Mini, which is 4 bay. There's a couple desktop units that are 4 or 5 bays that connect through USB 3, Thunderbolt 1, or Thunderbolt 2. So these are direct attached to use by a single computer, a single machine at a time. There's also a family of network storage products that are the 810N or the 5N, and they connect on the network. So they're available to multiple machines. Up and out of the box, you're ready to go. You have a single account already called public. You have multiple users. You can create different accounts for different people, and those can be shared, and you can have different access privileges, all within the local facility. If you want remote access, there's some Drobo apps called My Drobo and Drobo Access that will give you the capability that anywhere around the world where you have an internet connection, you can get back to your Drobo and get access to your system. So an interesting application of that, right now we're going on, there's the Olympics. One of the Olympic photographers, he was a fellow named Jeff Cable, and he has also a Drobo A10N. And what he's doing is he's backing up his favorite photos. So he's taking hundreds or thousands of photos, but every day he may have 10 or 20 photos. He's uploading them from the press room in Rio to an 810 that's at his studio here in Saratoga, California. So that's another example of how to use remote access to get another offsite 3-2-1 copy. In his case, it's a little bit of a distortion because he's on location for a couple of weeks, but still, we absolutely must have. There's no way I can move forward and live if I lose these photos. Those are backed up automatically to his home system. And this capability that's enhanced or it's made possible because the Drobo network models have inside a little server that is possible to run apps on.
And that's one way of doing it, and this is quite useful. So that's one of the benefits of the network Drobos, is that besides being able to share a Lightroom library or see it off of your laptop if you're in the house, is the ability to see it remotely or back up to it remotely. Of course, there are other workflows that you could add into that. I'm using CrashPlan, which has a nice sort of flat fee for backup. A lot of other folks are using things like Google Drive to back up their images, and Google will allow you to back up not the original files, but they do give you very affordable backup or even free backup for the compressed versions. So there's a lot of choices there. We had some questions pop up about cloud access. Vanelli, how do you readily use the cloud? You know, I think with a lot of these services, you could jumpstart them, right? I know for CrashPlan, for example, if I didn't want to take the 3 months to upload, I could pay some money and ship them a big old drive full of images, and they'll start the backup for me. How are you using the cloud to backup, Vanelli?
Yeah, I originally used CrashPlan, and then I switched over to Backblaze. And just I wanted to try a different server. The difference between the two, CrashPlan, like you said, if you have a lot of files, they'll send you a hard drive. You put everything on their hard drive, send it back to them, and you're up and running. Backblaze doesn't give you that option. So it took me a little over 4 months to get everything backed up to the cloud. So for that part of the cloud, that's an absolute last resort. You're hoping you never, ever have to download images from there. But the difference between, let's say, that and Google Drive is with CrashPlan or Backblaze, they'll save every version of that file that you created. So if you were to delete that file, make changes to it, several times, it'll keep it on their server for you. So you can actually go back, almost like Time Machine, go back in time and figure out what you want. With Google Drive or with Dropbox, it's a one-to-one. So once you put it up there, it's there. It's like copying it to a USB drive. The difference is it's off-site. So I'll use Google Drive or I'll use my 5N to send clients the images. If I want something on my phone real quick, I'll drop it to Google Drive or to Dropbox, and I can just use it for a transfer. So in my workflow, I kind of use it more as a transfer tool than a backup tool.
Okay. Well, and that is one of the many benefits. Now, we had a question from Don Carroll about a simple backup solution, Drobo or other, for someone that's not a pro photographer, but captures on average several thousand images a year. So I'm going to offer a couple here. And, first up, I would say it doesn't matter. I can tell you quite clearly why I use Drobos, but that's next. But it doesn't matter what you use. For example, in my system here, I still have a bunch of USB 3 hard drives that I use as extra backup copies. The key is to have more than one. So if you, for every one hard drive you buy another one that's just as big and connect both of them and have 2 copies going. Keep one mirrored with the other. And then, of course, with the cloud storage solutions, even if you have no budget whatsoever, Google will allow you to back up JPEG versions of your images or optimized versions of their images, as they refer to it, that are quite large still. And while that's not perfect, at least you're not losing a lot of your work. So even on a tight budget, it's really the cost of adding a second hard drive and using one of the free online backups. But as you start to step up, this does become attainable. Now, the benefit that I see in the Drobo ties directly into Diego's question here, which said, RAID mirroring is great, but a hard drive will eventually fail. Do you suggest an alternate way of backing up locally, SSD or optical disc? So I think he meant SSD or optic disc, and we'll talk about those here. So first up, let's talk about hard drives failing, and then we'll talk about other storage types. So all hard drives fail. They're spinning tires. Mark, I think there's this myth that, like, if I just load the data up and set the hard drive on my shelf and I don't keep it spinning, that data won't fail. It's like a vault there, just waiting to be restored later. Talk to us about hard drive failure. What are some signs? What are some warning signs? And then destroy a couple of myths about putting a drive sitting on a shelf.
Okay, so the first thing is, if you buy a drive, it's meant to be spinning. And it may be possible you take it out and you think, okay, well, you look at it, it seems like it's metal, it's heavy. I'll just take it and I'll be careful. I won't drop it, I won't jostle it. The problem is that in reality, hard drives are not designed just to be sitting around. Also, many of them, before the advent of some of the larger 8 terabyte drives, they do actually have airflow from the outside. So what that means is, if you have a dusty environment, and things like that, it's possible that your dust, can be drawn into the drive. Not saying that's happening to everybody, but it's one of the things of why it's meant to be in spinning and controlled environment. You don't want the humidity and condensation. These are all other factors that will contribute to a drive failing. Now, what we've seen is that empirically, collecting a lot of data over the past, since around 2008 or so, it seems that if you just put drives, on the shelf, that 1 year later, if you say you have 10 drives, 1 year later, about two to three of them won't come up and spin. So it seems that there's about a 20-25% failure rate of drives just sitting on the shelf in 1 year. So different way to think about it is, okay, I don't need to save 25% of my photos. The problem is you don't know which ones. So you're playing a giant game of Russian roulette here. So you're taking a big risk. So that is one of the ways that Drobo has a multi-drive system, and other multi-drive systems out there help mitigate risk, is that they'll make a copy of the data and a little bit of error protection so that if a drive does fail, you're able to recover and not lose your images.
And let me address that really quick. I want to show how that works. So I'm going to share my screen here, just so you guys understand what's actually happening on that. So I've got my Drobo dashboard up, and I'm going to go to one of my Drobos here. And what I can do is I can adjust settings. So I can say that I want dual disk redundancy, for example, if I wanted it set up that way, so that up to 2 drives could fail with no data loss. Now I've got it set up just for single disk redundancy, but if one of these hard drives goes bad, it's going to blink red at me. And I've been out of the country and have had my own child just walk up. You don't need any tools. You just push the button, drive pops out, put a new one in, and it rebuilds. So it's pretty simple. And you can even go as far under your tools, and you can actually set up alerts. So what you can do there is you can have it send you a warning when something is damaged with the Drobo. So you can get a text message when something goes down. I believe that is under, here we go, dashboard preferences. So you just turn on send email alerts and load up your information. And what it will do then is actually send you an alert when there's a problem with your device. So I usually have that set up, and then if I'm on the road, I can still get those notifications, which is great. In the office, the ability to just walk past the unit and see that there's a problem with the feedback lights makes it quite useful. Now, all RAIDs have that benefit of multiple drives keeping copies of the data, but some RAIDs are easier to repair than others. The Drobo is as simple as popping in a new disk. Others require you to have the exact same disk size, or sometimes to load them in certain combinations. What I like about the Drobo is that I can still access the data while it's in the middle of a repair. So to answer your question, Diego, yes, all hard drives fail, and I've had that happen. But over time with my Drobos, for example, this Drobo Pro, you see that it's all at 3 terabytes. When I started this one, it was at 1.5 terabytes. And I'm not nearly at capacity, but when one of these drives fails, I'm going to put a cheaper drive in, a new drive in, like a 6 terabyte drive, because drive prices keep going down. So this makes it easy to upgrade in place. So you can see here that on this unit, my 810N, I've done some upgrading. So I have some 5 terabyte drives plus 3 terabytes and 4 terabytes all mixed together, which gives me the flexibility to expand as needed. So it makes it a little bit easier to deal with the repair. Now, you ask about optics and SSDs. We'll talk about that next. But Mark or Vanelli, have you ever had to do a repair?
Mark knows. I just
happened right after you wrote an article.
I just had two hard drives fail within a week of each other, and then when I looked them up, because on my hard drives, I actually put the date of when I installed it.
I use a label maker and put the date on of when I put it in.
Yep, and they were 5-year-olds. So in all fairness, before I wrote that article, 5 years ago, I got all excited and went to Staples and bought all my hard drives at once.
Ooh,
and put
bad
all
idea.
In the so that's like buying all light bulbs at once, putting them all in the house. Well, no wonder. Yeah, so they're 5 years old. So, and this thing is on 24/7. I've had it for over 5 years. So yeah, the hard drives are going to fail. And as soon as I saw one fail, I knew the other was coming real soon. So I just grabbed another one to be on the safe side, and sure enough, within about a week or so of itself, it failed too. And I called Mark. We were laughing about it because I was right in the middle of writing the article, on it. So.
Yep. And Mark, what are the typical warranties on drives, and are these failures normal? I think people sometimes forget that they have to fail. They're spinning pieces of metal.
So drives do fail, and if you look at the reliability over time, it's sort of like a bathtub curve. It sort of starts out high, you have a lot of infant mortality, then it declines to a very low rate, and then it starts to pick up again. When it picks up, it generally correlates with the warranty of the drive, which just makes economic sense, right? If a Seagate or WD is warranting the drive for 1 year or 3 years or 5 years or 4 years, basically they're saying, we bet that we'll sell this to you, and you bet we're going to have no problem until after that time period. I've noticed in my own. I'll hold that question. I've noticed in my own use of drives that they do tend to correlate with failure. Does tend to correlate with the length of the warranty. In general, some drive makers they fail after. One other one seems to fail a little bit before, a little bit after. But as a result, what I've made a practice of doing, I think this is why both you and Vanelli put dates and labels on it, is you should think about, okay, if I buy a drive, if it has a 2-year warranty, I should be thinking about replacing it within 2 years. Or similarly, if it has a 4-year warranty, I should replace it within 4 years. The reason is that's what the manufacturer is telling me is as far as when they'll warrant the drive. Now, reality, many people, they may have their data growth increase. And that's one of the things that's very unique about Drobo is you can simply pull a drive out, put a bigger drive in, and you increase the storage capacity. So it all depends on the nature of whether you have a big storage archive or it's part of your working storage. But drives do fail, and Drobo is designed with that in mind. Unlike many of the other RAID systems out there, where failure is catastrophic and requires expert help, Drobo, as they say, will just take a licking and keep on ticking.
Now, the question was also about other local backups, SSD versus optic discs. Let's tackle the easy one, optical discs. So this is a stack of Blu-rays. And if you look at that closely, you'll see that it supports 25 gigabytes. Now, in the past, wow, 25 gigs. A CD was 650 megs, and a DVD was 4 gigs. That all sounds great until I look in my card wallet and I see that my cards are 64 gigs, 128 gigabyte. I do a lot of time-lapse shooting and shooting video, and 25 gigs is about
too small. Way too small.
It's a couple hours of work, if that, for me. And so it just takes forever to burn that. The other thing that I've seen firsthand is unless you're buying really expensive archive quality discs, we've had discs in our office that we've pulled out and the material flakes off after 5-6 years. Unless you're keeping these temperature controlled, and even then, they do wear out over time. They're not meant to be a long-time archive solution, which everyone thought they were. There's a big difference between pressed manufactured Blu-rays and DVDs and the ones that are recordable that you burn on your own. So I am not a big fan of optics. I will offer another solution in just a second, but I also think there's a misperception. SSDs are great. They're fast. They tend to be very expensive, but I don't think they're necessarily that much more secure from failure than a hard drive. It's just more of a speed or performance issue. Mark, are SSDs inherently more reliable or about the same as a hard drive?
So there's another myth out there. If you talk about putting a spinning drive on a shelf and leaving it there, you'll have problems galore with an SSD, where they're meant to be periodically refreshed. Because the way it works is basically, instead of a hard drive, you align pieces of metal, so you align the magnetism. With an SSD, the way it's constructed, you have basically a little well that you put electrons in so to store a charge. If it's not being used over time, those electrons will float away and you'll lose what's in it. There was last year quite a bit of consternation and shock about SSDs, and they fell, and this is horrible, but this is well known as part of their behavior, and systems integrators and are well aware of this. I think it's just something that sort of hit amateur users unaware that if they pull it out and there's no electrical connection, over time your data you're going to get bit rot. It's just going to migrate away. So SSDs are not really archive drives. They're great in computers. They're fast. They're lightweight. They're more expensive than mechanicals on a dollar per storage unit basis. But unfortunately, these different technologies all have different trade-offs.
Now, with SSD drives, there's no tell time. I mean, it just happens. One day it's working, the next day it's not. With a hard drive, you'll start to hear clicking sounds, or your data starts to get corrupted, so you know something is wrong with the hard drive. But with SSDs, it's just one day it'll work, one day it won't.
Yeah. So that leads me to my suggestion. Now, it's not affordable. So, earlier there was a question about affordable backups. To me, one of the affordable methods of the backup is plugging in one of those giant 8-bay Drobos, because if I leave it powered on, it's going to scrub the data and validate the data and make sure that it's fresh and then alert me when a hard drive fails. So you can keep that unit running for some time. But what we do in our office for long-term backup is LTO, which is this type of tape backup that's used by financial institutions. It's a little bit expensive to get into the drives, but the cartridges are designed to have 25, 50-year shelf lives, which I call in my line of work just long enough for me to make it to retirement, so I'll never be bothered about the data again and not need it. But depending upon where you're at in your career, you might need another type of technology to get you to jump one more time. Now, this does also address, Vaughn was saying, what about archiving or storing photos when you're not going to touch them for a considerable amount of time? So I just mentioned one of the things that we do is that near-term storage. That's where I have on my desktop, for example, the vaults, an 8-bay Drobo, big hard drive set in there. 2 drives can fail with redundancy, plus I mirror it to a second one. And that sounds like a lot, but these are my most important files. This is, stuff that I don't care about speed, but I do want reliability. Mark Vanelli, do you have any other long-term solutions outside of a Drobo for a good long-term backup besides the cloud and besides LTO? Any other advice, Mark, maybe?
For photographers, I mean, honestly, we're missing the printing phase. A lot of photographers are no longer printing, so having an actual hard copy, whether it's in photo album, I'm talking just strictly as a photographer side, in the photo albums and stuff like that, that's always great. But for the long term, like you said, the tape is what a lot of the institutions use. For myself, the Drobo, or a RAID type environment is what's best for me.
Okay. Mark, any other storage types or storage formats coming out? I think this is where the cloud is really starting to shine. That slower long-term backup, Amazon storage, Glacier storage, Microsoft, lots of others.
So I think here we're seeing sort of confluence and convergence of 2 things. One is the offsite backup piece, and also cloud. And these are good for, they're affordable, and presumably somebody at Amazon, they are doing the ongoing data migration. Sort of one of the dirty little secrets of the storage business, and it's been an undercurrent in our conversation here, is that you buy a device, you put it on, and that's after some number of years, that device needs to be replaced. And that's something you can do yourself by having multiple Drobos, and Rich, you were just describing how you and your businesses do that. We can do that personally. I know I have multiple Drobo devices that have different copies of data, and also I have other personal cloud devices. Think of the transporter that I have in 3 different locations for I don't know, probably 300 or 400 gigabytes of the most important data that I don't want to put at risk. and that's also copied on multiple Drobos as well. So I think these are all alternatives. The ugly reality is that either you do it yourself, or if you go to a cloud provider, you can pay a little bit of money and have somebody do it for you. But the days of papyrus lasting thousands and thousands of years, or original photographs lasting a couple hundred years, that does not exist with digital data, unfortunately.
So it becomes something that you have to make a part of your workflow. So for example, every Sunday night, I have a calendar alarm at 10 o'clock that reminds me to plug in my backup drive to my laptop. I just keep it in my laptop bag. It's an SSD, and it makes a clone of everything on my laptop. That way, I've got 2 copies of my laptop data. Plus, my 810N or my 5N is set up with Time Machine support, so it backs up. And my Microsoft Surface has the same thing. It has a backup utility built into it, so it can go to Microsoft's cloud, or I can target a volume on my Drobo. And what's nice about the network Drobos is I could set up backup volumes for both Mac and Windows on the same device. And I've got a backup volume for my wife and now my son. So that way, when their computers are on and they're on the home network, they're backing up automatically. Because I learned firsthand that when I've had to do backups for employees or spouses, they both seem to have the same problem. Oh, I turned that off. That pop-up dialog was so annoying. And they go in and disable anything that we did to set up the backup. So when left to their own devices, human beings seem to be able to do just about everything that they can to disable an effective backup workflow. So I think it's pretty important that you make this part of it. Vanelli offered the advice of dating his drives. I put calendar alerts on when to refresh this stuff. So you can decide to swap things out prematurely. Mark, do you see any benefit of putting an expiration date on a drive, and even if it hasn't failed, think about migrating that data? Like if the warranty is 3 years, should we put an expiration date on that drive and plan to migrate it before catastrophe hits, even if we already have 2 copies?
I would think so, and the reason is that most likely you're going to have more data. So recently on my 5-bay Drobo, I acquired it, about 2 years ago. Originally put it into service with the combination, I think it was 3 terabyte and then 2 terabyte, or maybe they were 1.5 terabyte drives. About 2 years ago, I upgraded, I bid hard and opened the wallet for Amazon, and we've got 4 6 terabyte hard drives, put them in. That lasted me for a while. And then this spring, I popped the last drive out and replaced it with another 6 terabyte drive. So I think most people go through a situation like that over time, you'll see that your data needs increase. And the ultimate beauty about Drobo is you can buy drives of different capacities, and you can really optimize your price, because hard drives, generally the price bands are the same. There'll be a little bit of room of migration within the different price band, but the capacity is what changes. So right now, Seagate and WD, the drive they're putting at the top is 10 terabyte hard drive. So get ready. We're going to see that these 4 terabyte drives are going to drop and be replaced by 6 or 8 terabytes as the sweet spot in the market, with 10 terabytes at the top. So again, it may sound excessive, but if you're doing this as an ongoing strategy of upgrading your drives as your data needs increase, you will naturally be having drives that are fresh, i.e. they're within the warranty, and you have a great device that accomplishes the place for storing your ever-growing collection of digital data.
Now, we've had a few people sort of join us midstream. I just want to go back to the beginning for just a second and add a couple of extra pieces of advice. So what we've been talking about is 3-2-1 backup, which is the need to have 3 distinct copies of your data, and that those need to be on 2 different formats, meaning at least 2 different storage types, one of those being offsite. So in my case, I gave you the laptop example. I've got the internal hard drive on the laptop. I've got an external SSD. Plus, I'm doing a cloud backup. And in case, really, 2 types of cloud backup. One of those is offsite. I've got my offsite cloud, But then I've also got the ability to use Time Machine, or even Crash Plan for that matter. Drobo supports Crash Plan, so even if I'm in the road on the go at a hotel, I could be backing up to my Drobo back at the house. So it's nice that you've got the ability to target one of those network ones. But this is part of that workflow, is thinking it through. Vanelli, you've shared with folks that you have multiple units attached to your device. Talk a little bit about the automation that you do, because some of you are thinking, wow, this is so much work, I got to invoke this. But we showed you in Lightroom, you could set it up to make 2 copies to go, and I've got Crash Plan just running every night. It checks and finds what's different and pushes that up to the cloud. What are some of the automation strategies you take so you don't have to constantly do this, but you know all the steps are happening?
Gotcha. Hey, can I share my screen to show that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's see. Okay. Can you see it?
Yep, it says good.
So I have the good, better, best solution. And like you said, the 3-2-1 concept. So here's the good solution: one external hard drive, or I'm using my computer as one source, then my second source, and then up to the cloud on the other ones. Here's a better solution, and then in doing this, I'm using in between drive A and drive B, I use SyncBack Pro, and what SyncBack Pro does is every night, or every Sunday, or I'm sorry, every night at 2 a.m., SyncBack Pro takes whatever I created on that drive A, and it mirrors it onto drive B. It doesn't
That's very
copy
similar
it.
to the Carbon Copy Cloner I mentioned for Mac. SyncBack
Exactly.
Pro is a Windows program that's similar, right?
Exactly. And the reason why I chose to mirror it is my drive A is going to be identical to drive B. If I put something on drive A, it automatically goes to drive B. If I put something on drive B, it automatically gets erased by drive A, because I want that to be bit by bit, bit for bit, identical. So that's just one way I do it. Some people like to have those.
I like a safety net because I'm stupid sometimes.
Yeah, some people like syncing them. So if they put something accidentally on drive B, it automatically goes to drive A for them. And if there's a conflict, it tells you, hey, this is a newer file, this is an older file. So for me personally, I found mirroring was better than syncing. But again, like you said, each person's a little bit different. The best solution, of course, is, I have all my media files on my 5D, or all my working files on 5D, and then at night, once again, it transfers over to my 5N. And then over here with Crash Plan, same thing. Crash Plan goes off, or in this case, Crash Plan, I use Backblaze now. At 3 a.m., my Crash Plan or Backblaze goes up to the cloud itself. So in between these two here, I have SyncBack Pro, or like you said, what's a Carbon Copy Cloner?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason why we're saying 3 a.m., both Vanilla and I have a tendency to stay up too late at night, so usually that's our bedtime. But you're putting it in the middle of the night so that you're not slowing down your network performance. Performing these big uploads can slow down the network, so scheduling it for times when people aren't working or you're not using your home entertainment center means that you're not going to see any big negative draw there, which works pretty well. And that makes a lot of sense. So V, you're doing that sort of automation. Is there anything you're doing inside of Lightroom, for backup, or do you copy to your drives and then import? Personally, I'm not a huge fan of Lightroom's importer. I feel better using a cloning utility to clone to my drives and verify before I import to Lightroom. But how about you?
Yeah, so with Lightroom, I'm from the school of thought is I start in Lightroom, so I import all my images into Lightroom itself. And then once a week, yes, I let Lightroom verify a backup for me of my catalog. Just make sure my catalog is okay, and then that catalog gets sent to to my 5N, and then goes up to the cloud. So no, I and Mark and I were talking about doing a verifier. I'm relying on SyncBack Pro to do that for me. I'm relying on SyncBack to make sure that each of them are the same.
Well, they're the same, but what ticks me off about Lightroom is that it's not verifying the data on input. So I don't know that if for any reason there was a card read error or a blip, you're not necessarily getting a guaranteed file. Now, taking things to a slightly different direction, besides all these photos and our video files that we might have, JP said, what about our home data centers? Any common mistakes here? Because I gave you a couple of things where I've got other people. You've got another photographer that you partner with, Vanelli. You've got a child at home. So do I. Mark, any common mistakes we're seeing here that people make in a multi-user environment that could be catastrophic that they have to be careful about?
Yes, I think you touched on it earlier. That is, somehow your setup and automation escapes you. So somehow somebody is outside of the normal backup. Maybe they turn something off for convenience or whatever. So I really think that this is change in the discussion now, that in addition to making sure you're doing your backups, ultimately, how often does Rich, you or Vanelli check your backups? Or same question for people in the listening audience. It doesn't make any difference. You should periodically check it. And a lot of people recommend either Change of Seasons or Friday the 13th. These are different mental mnemonics just to get in the habit of you should check to see what's out there. And how do you do it? Well, you could check it with some of your tools just to make sure that you still have copies out there. There's some more advanced tools that will do checksums and make sure things are still correct. Or you can just randomly go out and just do a visual inspection. Decide you're going to pick 25 photos and then just go in and pick them from different years and different projects and go in and take a look.
Yeah. So, since we spoke last time, I like the Friday the 13th because that just, worst day possible. But like Rich was saying also, my Drobo set to send me an email if a drive fails. My Backblaze tells me if it didn't proceed with the proper backup, and then SyncBack Pro does the same thing. So I'm getting alerts. If something were to go down, I'm getting alerts. But like you said, if somebody were to shut it off, well, there goes those alerts.
Yes.
Right. Well, similarly with another photographer who's also a photo focus writer, Kevin Ames. We've just finished a couple-month project where he was using an 810N for doing backup. He was using Carbon Copy Cloner, and it was sending him some spurious error messages, and ultimately it just we worked, and we got Mike Bombic at Bombic software involved. And we found instead of just mounting it as a data type, we created for all the Mac people out there a sparse image, which basically means that the Mac controls the file system. And when he did that, just solved a lot of the problems, because previously he was getting some very subtle network latency delays that were causing spurious error reports. But running with a sparse file type, everything ran like a champ. And he's using an 810N as a network backup. So these are all sorts of different things I think people can do to sort of automate it. But also the reason I got onto that is as part of that process, Carbon Copy Cloner will send messages about whether it succeeds or finds errors. And again, I think that's one thing that is something that's absolutely essential to take a look at, because oftentimes a sign of impending drive failure can be either problems with write or write performance, or sometimes read performance. These are true of hard drives, spinning mechanicals, that if something is developing as a problem, you'll start to see external signs and symptoms. Whereas SSDs just tend to be sudden catastrophic destruction.
Now, we had a good question from Jose that I wanted to address real quickly, which is he says he's currently using Amazon Drive as the offsite storage option since it allows raw photos to be uploaded, which is great. Any downside to this compared to Backblaze or CrashPlan? Well, about the only downside I see is that depending upon how you're setting it up, I believe with Amazon Photos and Google Photos, they're really just optimized for the pictures themselves. Well, I've got other files I want to back up: my catalog, client deliverables, PSDs, TIFF files, DNGs, other file formats that it might not support. So that's one of the benefits of Backblaze and CrashPlan is not only can I back up my photos, but I can also back up my computer and my catalog. So, but Amazon, put it this way, there's nothing wrong with Amazon Photos. I do use it. I also have like my camera roll backing up to things like that, as well as Microsoft's cloud. Like I see it as a multi-solution here, since they're often very cheap or even free, particularly if you have a thing like an Amazon Prime membership. So go ahead and take advantage of that for sure. There's no harm there in those backups. And then Don asked a question about an advanced backup system. Where can I find a good primer? Well, a couple things here. First up, we actually did a totally free ebook that I would recommend, and it's here. Do you guys see the window? It's available on Photo Focus, and it says it's available till February 14th. I actually made it still available. You'll get a download link. So you can go there. It's called Get Organized in Lightroom. And Vanelli and a couple of our other authors, Kevin Ames, Rob Sylvan, Levi Sim, Nick Minora, all put together some great workflow tips on how to keep your images organized in Lightroom as well as backed up. And Drobo sponsored that ebook, so that's a $20 book that we're giving away totally for free. I put the link, if you want to get right to there, on the Google Plus page. So it's just bit.ly, and the link is storage ebook, so bit.ly / storage ebook, and that'll take you right to this page where you can download it. So this will help sort of serve as homework from after today's webinar to help you fill some of that stuff in if you find that useful. So hopefully that gives you a good idea. We did have one more question, and then we're going to start to wrap things up, which is this idea that when it comes to things like reliability, security, privacy, what would you suggest for people just getting started? So Mark, obviously there's different levels to these cloud storage plans. For somebody who's on the budget side, do you have any preferences of one over the other, or Vanelli? I think that Amazon Photos is a pretty good option if you're an Amazon Prime member, since they give you a lot of storage for free. But any experiences, Mark?
Well, I think that, again, talks to some of the strengths and weaknesses of different services. My understanding of Amazon Photo is the same as yours, Rich, that it needs to be photos. I haven't experimented to see if I can just upload another file, say like an Excel spreadsheet or something, or PDF. So it may or may not allow you to do that. So relative to privacy, I think the best thing is make sure that you encrypt it locally before you transmit it to an offsite location. Everyone talks about sort of encrypted data at rest or data in transit. Almost every system nowadays will have an HTTPS link, so it's encrypted in transit. What you also want is the file itself encrypted, so that maybe your tax returns and other banking and financial information. There are ways on Macintosh that you can create disk images, and those can be encrypted. I believe there are third-party utilities that allow people to do similar things in the Windows world. But there, if you're going to be sensitive about security, there's that old adage, I think, would apply, which is if you want to keep it a secret, don't tell anyone. Here, what that means is if you want to keep it a secret, don't put a plain version on.
Don't put your boudoir photos on the web, is what you're saying.
Or your nude selfies.
Okay, well, we had one more question, which is a good one, and it's the data being held hostage question. And I'm going to address this both from all drive manufacturers, and then we could talk about Drobo specifically. So Scotty says, the elephant in the room. What happens when the Drobo fails? Because the way the data is saved across multiple drives, how does this affect the risk of unit failure, compromising the entire house of cards? So I'm going to offer a non-official answer for that, and then I'll let you tell your story. So first up, one of the things to realize with all RAID systems, whether it's a Synology RAID, whether it's a GTEC RAID, all of these have a mechanism for keeping the data mirrored across multiple drives. Now, with some systems, when a hard drive fails, you have to put a new drive in and let it be restored. Other ones require you to buy specific drive modules from that manufacturer and then get that shipped to you. So, for example, I looked on a lot of the G-RAIDs, you have to order from the manufacturer to get the official drives. In my case, I reach over to the shelf and grab a 6 terabyte drive, and I can pop that in. And if I needed more than one, I could order them on Amazon, or in my case, I live in a major metropolitan area, I could drive down the street, buy one, and have it popped in. So this isn't a big deal. I usually keep 3 or 4 spare drives in the office and here, so it's quick. But what happens if the whole unit fails? Well, that does happen. Power supplies go bad. Maybe you get a power surge. Just because the container fails doesn't mean that the drives inside have failed. So I have successfully migrated entire drive packs from one Drobo unit to another Drobo unit. And so in my case, just like we keep spare parts for the computers, we've got 20-some computers and 15 people in my office, we do have a spare Drobo. So if a Drobo unit were to act up, we can move the drives from one unit to the other because we want 0 downtime. But if I needed to, I could overnight buy one. If I've got Drobo Care or extended warranties, there are different options, like the new 5DT has a support plan for that. So you can migrate things. But this is no different than what happens if my Mac goes down. In my case, if my Mac goes down, it's down for a minimum of 3 days because Apple will require that much time, even if you have Apple Care, to get the repair in. Almost all the time it's got to get sent out. They don't keep spare parts around. So it's about a 3-day repair. So it comes down to a matter of redundancy. Now, if you had those 2 copies on 2 units, just switch over to the other unit and start another backup, or say, well, I've got one here and I've got one in the cloud. I'll feel better when my 3rd copy comes back, but I can deal with that repair. So, Mark, you had a story here. I think this hostage feeling or this concern that people have is really because they're not doing 3-2-1, they're doing one copy, and that's not a backup. Yes, it's extra safe that the Drobo can have 1 or 2 hard drives fail, but that's still not a backup.
Right. So you sort of stole my thunder there, which is that with Drobo, let's look at sort of in the hierarchy of what are the most common things to fail. First is the hard drive. Second is probably either cable or power supply, and then finally it might be something about the Drobo itself. And there, what we've seen is a common failure mechanism is people may transport the Drobo, even though it's big and bulky. They may transport it with the drives inside, and they may damage the backplane connector. Actual failure rate on electronics is very, very, very exceedingly low. So it's mechanical things that are much higher risk.
Well, I don't want to gloss over that point, Mark. So you brought up something really good. Like a unit like this is meant to be portable. This is designed to be thrown in the laptop bag and carried. But if you do have to move a 5D, a 5N, or any of the others, you should unmount the drives before you move the unit, unless it's like, oh, I'm sliding it across the desk, right? If we're going to be moving this around or moving offices or tossing it in the car, we shouldn't transport it with the drives in it, right?
There's a gray zone there. Certainly sliding it or carrying it from one place in the office to another, unless you're going to drop it when you get to the destination, you don't need to take the drives out. Putting in a car, well, again, it all depends on the sort of the roads you drive over, and
potholes bad.
Potholes bad. If you're going to be on if it's going to be on a rough road, you might want to take them out, but you probably don't need to. I was thinking more about you want to pack it and take it on an airplane ride or something. There you best to unpack it. There's a photographer named Serena Catania who used to always send me pictures of her Drobo in the backpack, and at points I used to think she almost bought a second plane ticket to carry the Drobo in the seat next to her. And in cases like that, there is a little bit of risk. If it's under your control, you'll be gingerly with it. If you put in the luggage, well, we all know what happens to luggage in airplanes. So that's probably the worst case. Or similarly, if you want to pack it and send it somewhere via FedEx, that's the worst case, because the backplanes were not designed, and the packaging wasn't designed, for all that shock and standard. But assuming for whatever reason, something fell, you can simply slide the drives out and put them into either the same model Drobo, or as a lot of people have discovered, one of the unique benefits of Drobo is within a family, direct attached or network attached. You take the drives out and put them in a more modern Drobo, and very often, if you do that, you get a big benefit of additional performance because being a couple years newer, it's got faster chip inside as well as faster interface. So really, this highlights one of the things that Drobo was designed to do is to keep your data safe forever. And there's all the risk factors of why you get a problem with a single drive. It gets full or it breaks. But with Drobo, you have multiple drives. You can always increase capacity as long as you can get another bigger drive on the market. And there seems to be no sign that Seagate or WD are hitting any limits in terms of the drive capacity that they have. So Drobo presents itself now as a 64 terabyte volume. That's huge, as they say.
Yes. Now, I wanted to address one more thing that popped up, and then we'll take some closing remarks from each of you. And that is, remember, folks, you can mix and match manufacturers here. So when I am in the field, I will frequently travel with my Drobo Mini. If it's just an about town, or I'm just tossing something right in the camera bag, it might be 2 bus-powered laptop drives and my Microsoft Surface, because it's just, I could run bus-powered without needing to plug that in and be backing up in the field. When I get back to the office, while I have a bunch of Drobos plugged in, I still have a bunch of single Western Digital drives that we bought that were dirt cheap, and I'll use that as a yet another time machine volume, because you can have 3 time machines running. You can have more than that, but I set up multiple copies. I go off of the belief that if something bad is going to happen, it might be really bad, and so having different drives and different power supplies and surge protectors is always a good idea. And if you've already invested in an expensive performance storage solution, you're totally happy with it. You've got a performance disk grade that flies and you love it and it works, no big deal. But consider adding a network Drobo so that when you're out and about, you can access your backups remotely, or that you can have another copy that could be seen by other people on your network. This isn't an all or nothing. The big thing that we were trying to drive home today was the idea of 3-2-1, having 3 copies on 2 different mediums, meaning not just a magnetic hard drive, but at least something else like tape or cloud, and one of those backups needing to be off-site. With your network Drobos, one added benefit, just to mention, is that they can see each other. So you could put one network Drobo at home and one in the office and tell them to back things up off-site. So rather than pay a lot of money to a cloud storage provider, if you don't need it, you can mirror one Drobo to another, and that's what we do in our office. All of our financial records are backed up from our office to my business partner's house, and I'll also be setting it up to go to my house, which makes it that much easier to keep things mirrored for disaster recovery. So hopefully this all made sense to you guys today. Vanelli, do you have some other advice, and then we'll take some closing advice from Mark?
No, just stick to the backup plan of 3-2-1. And if you're not, if you have less than 4 terabytes of data, you can get away with getting the inexpensive little hard drives. If you have more than 4 terabytes, now is the time to get a RAID system like a Drobo. But you need that 3-2-1 concept. And it's not just for professional photographers. If I lost my child's baby photos, that's a major problem. So 3-2-1, making sure you have 3 copies, 2 local, 1 off-site. And if you use that philosophy, let it grow with you from there.
And absolutely, and you mentioned that, my wife, I was cleaning up the house and I found an old LaCie single hard drive in the drawer, and I plugged it in, and on it were iMovie movies that my wife had cut of my son, tons of video from him as a baby, and I realized that while I had some of these exports at crummy web compressions, this data wasn't backed up. So I immediately got that onto my Drobo, got that backed up to 2 locations, because this was sitting on a hard drive that had been in the drawer for almost 4 years. So I was really lucky, and even on that drive, some of the files were not recoverable. We had started to see some corruption on this. Mark, any other closing advice about 3-2-1 backup so people can keep their files safe?
Yes. First, I'd like to make a point of clarification. What you were saying a moment ago about backing up from system to system, that's capability that's limited to the 810N. So don't want to have people have a wrong impression.
Okay.
So I think the way I think about it is 321. If you take a step back, really what we're discussing here is ways to protect either your images, or it broadens to almost any digital data, that you're going to have risks, and this is a way to limit risk. The first thing is you should have a second copy locally, whether that's on a Drobo device or a single drive. Vanelli hit the issue. It really depends how much data do you have, and if it's more than fits on the drive, boom, you're going to be a candidate for a system like a Drobo. So you should have a separate thing. One of the things I hear people say is, "Oh, I don't need a backup. Drobo's my backup." No, a backup is a separate physical copy of your data. Drobo provides redundant storage, meaning it protects you against failure from 1 or 2 hard drives. But don't confuse the two. So second thing is, make sure you have a second copy locally. And then third, investigate cloud storage solutions. And depending on where you live in the country, maybe it's more appropriate to investigate power supplies and UPSs and surge protectors instead of a cloud backup. Depends just how much of a risk electrical storms are in your area. But really what we're talking about at 321 is just balancing different levels of risk. And obviously there is cost associated with this, cost in terms of just financial costs as well as time. Rich, you were saying before about if your Apple fails, that you're looking at a 3-day turnaround. Well, that's the whole benefit of a bootable backup. Is worst case, you just go get another Mac, you buy it, you plug in your bootable backup drive, and you're up and running. So backing up, like Vanelli's written on Photo Focus, backing up your system drive, that protects you against time. Backing up, your data, that protects you ultimately against your business or personal loss. Again, they're two different things, they're two different types of risks. So that's my parting message, is digital data is ephemeral. You need to have multiple copies.
Very good. Well, folks, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. I hope you find this webinar helpful. We'll be back in another month with some additional workflow tips. We are going to go deeper dive into the mobile photography workflow of working with different Lightroom catalogs. We are going to talk about other storage topics and common myths. So hopefully you found today's webinar helpful. We will have another one in about a month that tackles a different topic. So you can find news about that on photofocus.com. And there are a plethora of articles up there. So go ahead and search for Vanelli's articles as well as some of mine. We frequently address different backup methods. My name is Rich Harrington. I'm the publisher of Photo Focus, and I'd like to thank you very much for tuning in. If you weren't able to catch this entire webinar, it should be available shortly on YouTube, and we'll also turn it into a follow-up blog post on the website so you can easily take advantage of that. If you want to get that free storage ebook, I've also posted that to the page for the Google Plus page for the Hangout, and the shortcut link to that was bit.ly/storage ebook, which will make it easy for you to download that free book on Lightroom workflows. Thanks so much for tuning in. Bye-bye, folks.